This should be really encouraging to other small businesses that, hey, this is possible. This is actually achievable. Hello. It's Jacob Hill with GRC Academy. Today I'm here with Mr. Eric Fields. Eric, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Jacob. How are you?
Good, doing great. Thanks so much for coming on. And folks, if you're enjoying the podcast, you want to see more from GRC Academy, please like, comment, share, subscribe, review, all the things. Helps me out. Thanks in advance. Eric, tell us about yourself. How'd you get to where you are today?
I used to work for Caterpillar and a lot of other big companies, mostly doing HR stuff and operations. I moved back to my hometown, and there's a construction company that is headquartered in my hometown, a little small town in Indiana. I worked with them a little bit just as a consultant for a couple of things. And then they asked me to come on and run a project to get them certified for CMMC. And I told them, I'm not an IT guy, but I'll do as my best. And that's where I'm at now. And we just finished our assessment and got officially certified.
That's awesome. That's amazing. And Eric, you and I actually go a little bit back because I think it was 2023, early 2023, you actually were my second review on my CMMC overview course for defense contractors. So that's awesome. You know, it makes me really feel amazing that you're here now getting CMMC level 2 certified. How would you say the course helped you? Like, you know, was it really a big benefit?
It was a great benefit. I mean, when I started, I had no clue what CMMC was. GRC Academy was one of the things that I found out there, I think through LinkedIn on the internet. And I looked at your course and then took your course, and it really helped me get a good baseline of CMMC and that understanding. And to be honest with you, it's like I've gone back and referred to the product and what you provided a number of times as I have, implemented CMMC. It's like, okay, what does this mean? What are they looking for? Those type of things. But GRC Academy has been a big help to me.
That's awesome. I love to hear that. Talk to us about your company a little bit. And they told you that they wanted you to come on and help with the CMMC project. Does DoD work a large portion of their work?
DoD portion is not a very large portion of their work at this point, but it is something that is a good percentage of that. Maybe small percentage, 10%, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. But it's something that they want to continue to keep, and they would like to grow. So they knew CMMC was coming. They had done, they knew what NIST was and things like that. They have an IT manager here, just a small team. The IT manager, there was a part-time person that helped him from one of our other locations. And then I came in as kind of the second full-time person to run that project. And I've done a lot of other stuff in the last couple of years for them as I was doing the CMMC. But yeah, they kind of did the basic work with NIST, but really they didn't understand CMMC to the full length that it needed to be. So that's what they brought me in for.
Okay, I understand. And your background, you said, was in HR, and diving into the CMMC space. That's a very interesting,
Yeah, I did HR for, probably 12, 15 years. And then I did operations for the rest of my career. So, from an IT standpoint, I used a computer and that's it. So, I knew Excel well and, Word and all those kind of things and email and used that, but never really from an IT standpoint. So coming in, it was like, okay, I'll be happy to run the project. But I'm going to have a lot to learn. And they were fine with that. They were in no hurry. Obviously, when I came in and started this, they hired me in early 2023. So it wasn't really in effect yet. So They knew it was coming. They just didn't know when. So they said, let's just get started. And then, when it finally goes into effect, then we'll get our assessment and do that. And that's the way it worked out.
On your internal team, it was you kind of running the project, right?
Yeah.
Who else was working this with you?
For this particular project, I worked real close with the IT manager. Mm-hmm. So all of the technical stuff, obviously not being an IT person, I didn't know those technical things. How do you set this? How do you turn this on? How do you turn this off? How do you get to that? Those type of things. I didn't really understand that. and hadn't worked with that much. So that IT manager was a big support and a big help with that technical data and technical knowledge that I didn't have.
So you, IT person, and that was the show, right?
Yeah. So Chris is the IT manager, Chris Hall, and he was a big help. He knows that he's been doing IT for 20, 25 years, so he knows it inside out from an IT standpoint. He just didn't, have the CMMC knowledge of how to tie that together.
So whenever you were looking at, for example, the CMMC controls, you would probably go through a collaborative approach with him. And did you review them together, or did you review them alone and just say, here's what we need to do? How do we do it? How did that work?
So the way I started it with was the policies. So I looked at policies and procedures. We had some policies, but I needed to take those policies and kind of make sure they were compliant with the CMMC requirements. Mm-hmm. So I walked through that with him very early in the process. I found another big help was Kieri, KIERI.com, and their product, their Kieri, I think it's compliance documentation. They give you templates for both your policies, your procedures, and your SSP. And that was a tremendous help. It was really almost just fill in the blank. And it helped me, one, it made it easier for me to follow. And two, it helped me understand what CMMC and, what NIST was looking for to make sure that we were doing the right thing. So that's where I started with them. And that's where I started with the project, is those policies, procedures, and really a baseline and understanding of what the SSP was and a draft of that.
And a lot of folks will look at outsourcing, maybe bringing in some consultants or outsourcing to an MSP. But you totally, there were some resources you pulled in, like those policy templates, but you all just took this on. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, we did. We went out and we looked at, it's like, okay, how do we do this? And, we got quotes for somebody building it for us. We got quotes for an MSP coming in and, helping us build it and then running it afterwards and those type of things. And some of those quotes were just sky high. There was a couple of quotes that were over $100,000 to start with. That was the first, year or two. And then after that, it was $75,000 or $80,000 a year. And we're just not that kind of company that we can absorb that kind of cost, with it being 10% of our business. So we kind of looked at it again and said, okay, is there a different way to do this? Is there a way that we can do this ourselves? And we kind of, just again, by luck, using Kieri, not long after we kind of got into policies and procedures, they came up with their basically an architecture for an enclave. Okay. And they provided documentation that really, again, you could just follow the instructions and it would allow you to set up your enclave and manage it yourself. And that's what we're doing. It's just myself. I do have the part-time person that we have in IT does some things within the enclave from a maintenance checklist standpoint. And then the IT manager has some oversight things from a maintenance checklist standpoint. But that architecture that Kieri provided, again, was key to us being able to get to where we're at.
That's awesome. And I haven't looked into their architecture document. So does that specifically outline how to, maybe even what conditional access policies to set up within Microsoft, the whole deal? Does it go through all of that?
Yeah, it does everything. And, and I don't know what the cost is now. I know we were one of the first people to pick that up as well. So I think between the policies and procedures and then the SSP and the architecture documents to set up the enclave, we're talking like $15,000 or something, somewhere around that. Now, obviously that price is probably different. It's 2-3 years on now, but that is what we've taken it. And, they have been a big help. We did buy some consulting hours with them. And then I would consult with them, every 2 weeks or so, or once a month sometimes. And so I'd go do my work and everything. I'd note questions and everything, and then we'd meet, and then they'd answer questions, and we'd work through issues and things like that. So they were a big help as well. So again, I couldn't have done it without GRC Academy. I couldn't have done it without Kieri, and I couldn't have done it without the support of my company and then Chris, the IT manager.
Obviously, you would be setting up a CUI enclave, being a small percentage of the business, the DoD work. Were there any specific challenges setting up the environment, from getting licensing to anything else you'd like to highlight?
The licensing was okay. I didn't have any problems with the licensing and figuring that out. We were able to get a list from Kieri of here's some people where you get licenses from. So we got that figured out pretty easily. Setting up the architecture, there were particular things, again, not being a technical guy. There were questions that I had. It's like, okay, this doesn't make sense to me. I would go to the IT manager, or I would talk with Kieri about it, and work through those issues. Some of the issues that we had in the architecture is, with the Enclave, with our computers, you got to make sure they can't get to the Microsoft Store. They can't download stuff themselves. So you got to make sure those things are set up correctly, and the architecture is set up good for that. But as Microsoft changes, things change within the architecture. So, so you gotta kind of stay up on that. And we had to, what the architecture said, the way to do it, it didn't work. So I had to work through with Kieri about, okay, what do we need to do? So we did some testing on that, and then finally did figure it out, and it works from this point forward. So we're good there. But again, some technical issues, but you just kind of have to walk through it. And it's, and again, not being that technical guy, it's a technical issue, but it's the same type of issue you run into on the regular world, in operations or anything. You got to figure out what the result, or what the issue is, what the result you're trying to get to, and figure out a way to get there. So, it wasn't much different than that. It's just you're doing it technically rather than operationally.
Now, on the operational side of all of the tasks that happen to maintain the environment, maintain the compliance of the environment, what's your approach there?
What we do is, and again, this comes from Kieri. I keep giving them some kudos because they have a very good product. But they provide a maintenance checklist. So in that maintenance checklist takes you through things that they say you need to do on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, biannual, and annual. And I followed that maintenance checklist through and just make sure, and that gives me all of the documentation that I need in order to pass an assessment. What they did is they built this architecture and the policies and procedures based on what they did to pass their assessment. That maintenance checklist is key. It's just something you keep going back to. I mean, as soon as I get off this computer, it's Monday morning, I'll go do my weekly checklist. It doesn't take a lot of time. It gets longer for a monthly checklist, quarterly, biannual, annual, so on. But the weekly checklist, I mean, it goes pretty quick. As long as everything is going okay with your system, then you don't really have a lot. It's just making sure everything is going the way it's supposed to go. So that has been a big help, and it just makes sure everything is working within the Enclave.
Whenever you were talking through the education piece, initially starting with GRC Academy, but you've moved on even to CCP and CCA, how did that help you as you went through this process of ultimately gaining CMMC Level 2 certification?
We talked about that a lot, and with GRC Academy, I mean, again, it was great information. But I knew that it was going to be, it's like, okay, because of not having that technical background, I knew I needed more understanding of what these requirements are and things like that. So I went out in Cyber AV and looked at what they had, and, they've got the registered provider and those type of things. They talked about the CCP and the CCA. So I went through and took the class from Edwards. It was a 5-day class, and then studied for it, and then took the test and passed it. That helped me get a better understanding of the requirements. And I wanted to take it further, and Chris, my boss, and the company supported me in getting the CCA, because at that point, to me, then I know what an assessor is looking for.
Yes.
So if I know what an assessor is looking for, then when I'm doing that checklist and I'm making sure everything works correctly, I know what they're going to ask. So I can say, yep, if I'm an assessor, that's what I want to see. And I think that made a big difference when we went through the assessment. The other thing for us that we've done with that is that we've taken stuff that we've learned with going through the CMMC, is that we're actually going and applying a lot of that to our regular system. Where we're making some upgrades on that side, that it's like, okay, we did this in the Enclave, and hey, this is a good idea. We probably need to strengthen some of the things that we do on our regular system. So it's helped us out overall.
Oh, that's awesome to hear. That's great. Hey folks, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Vanta. Is your manual GRC program slowing you down? Well, there's something more efficient than spreadsheets, screenshots, and manual processes, Vanta. With Vanta, GRC can be so much easier while also strengthening your security posture and driving revenue for your business. Vanta automates key areas of your GRC program, including compliance, risk, and customer trust, and it streamlines the way you manage all of this information. And the impact is real. A recent IDC analysis found that compliance teams using Vanta are 129% more productive. So get back time to focus on strengthening security and scaling your business. Get started at vanta.com/GRC Academy. That's VANTA.com/GRC Academy. Now back to the episode. Talk to us about the CMMC Level 2 assessment experience.
Yeah, that was
very recent. How'd it go?
Yeah, it went well. We passed. We had our first meeting, I believe, in 1st of February or so. We finished up first week of March, I believe it was. By the 7th of March. It was a good process. It was, being a CCA, I knew what the process was going to be, and that helped me understand it a lot, because I thought as I got through it, I thought if I didn't know what that process was, I'd have got frustrated, and it's like, okay, what's going on? I'm not hearing anything from the assessor, but that's the process. They have to digest a lot of that, all of your information, your SSP, all of your policies, all of your procedures, all of the documentation you provide them. That's a lot to digest for them. So, that helped me do that and work through. We had a couple of days of interviews. We did it all virtually because everything's in an enclave. So everything was over the computer, just having meetings. We had 2 solid days of interviews about the different areas within CMMC that they needed to see different things and look at different things on our computer and make sure it was set correctly and things like that. But overall, it was very good. I didn't have a problem with it. I've heard some horror stories about it from other people. And, but for us, it went really well.
That's awesome. Any moments where you were thinking, oh no, we forgot to do that, or the assessor was digging and digging, for more and more? Any moments like that?
There really wasn't. There was a couple of times where it's like, okay, they'd ask a question, and we use CG Silvers as our assessor and everything. So, and Chris and his team was very good. So there wasn't any time where they might ask a question and I'd have to sit back and think about it. Most of the time it's by an email or something like that. And I'm thinking, it's like, what is that? And then when I dig into it, it's like, oh yeah, it's this over here. So there's so much you're trying to remember that it's like, if you've worked through it, then, it's in there somewhere. If you've done everything correctly, it's there somewhere. You just got to figure out where it's at.
Yeah, exactly. And did your SSP, the basis for that, come from the Kieri documentation?
Yeah, the SSP, the basis of that came from the Kieri documentation. Again, it was kind of, fill in the blanks. What I did, I think that the timing of all this kind of worked out very well. I went through and we had got everything done with the Enclave, and we're done with the consulting from Kieri. Everything is done there. And that was about probably August or September of last year. So we had a good, and we knew we were going to, get an assessment this year sometime. We weren't sure when at that point. But then, the law started to go through. It came into effect in December. We had talked with CG Silvers. They were becoming a C3PAO. So we got in line with them. And as soon as they were ready to go, then we were ready to go. So it gave us 3 or 4 months, 5 months of documentation, of just working through everything. In those months, I took that SSP and I just picked it apart. And I'm like, okay, the SSP says that refers to this procedure. And I went and made sure that, it says Section 2, Article 3, .I. It's like, is that procedure? Is that the one in the procedure? Oh, no, that's K. Okay, I got to change that. And I made sure that SSP matched exactly of, what it's referring to. It refers to the exact thing. So that assessor can look at that SSP and say, okay, it's referring to this procedure. Oh, yeah, that's right where it's at in the procedure. And the procedure explains what I did. And then, and here's where they do all the documentation. And I can go by in the documentation of that. That organization that you have for that documentation, those policies, those procedures, the SSP, that documentation is key. Because if you can give that an organized, set of documentation to that assessor, it is going to go much easier for you. The other thing I want to say about timing and everything. So we knew we were going to have our assessment got set up for the 1st of February. So there's an annual process that you go through and you're doing a self-assessment and you're self-assessing yourself against all of the NIST requirements and assessment objectives. And I walked through that over the last, the first 4 weeks of the year and went through that just in detail. And I documented it myself. I said, okay, if I'm an assessor, I'm looking for 3.1.1A. This is what I'm looking for. And it's like, okay, so I went out and I found that and I found that documentation and I saved that. So just like if I was an assessor, I want to see that. So I had all that documentation there. And then if they were looking for that, it's like, oh, it's right here. It's like, okay, so now it's easy for them. So, but that timing of that self-assessment, I think made a difference. Had it been in July, that self-assessment would have been old at that point. And one of my recommendations would be, if you're getting ready to do an assessment, go back and do a full self-assessment, do all that documentation so that you know that you're ready and you can answer any question.
Yeah, that is a great recommendation. Really, you got your system security plan, walks through the controls, but also the assessment objectives, and then maps to the evidence for all of those assessment objectives. What more could an assessor ask for? Because otherwise, especially if it's just mapped to the controls and they don't have the assessment objectives, that's going to be a long week.
Yeah, that would be a very difficult week. If you didn't have that SSP down to that detail, it would be a very long week because they're going to be asking questions and digging in because, they want to make sure if you don't tell them you know it up front, they don't know if you know it or not.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I mentioned it before. You want to project a certain level of confidence, in this assessment, because it's, I imagine, especially some assessors, they smell fear.
Yeah. That's correct. Yes, I'm sure they do. And I would too. It's like, and there was a couple of times it's like, okay. And then Chris, the IT manager, he sat in with all of those interviews and stuff. Mm-hmm. So there were times that I referred to him because he knows how to get to, again, those technical things. It's like, okay, you go to, Azure and Microsoft 365, and you go to this level, and here's where, and he would do that because he knows that off the top of his head. I got to look at that. That's what I documented for myself, but I don't want to dig through it while that assessor's sitting there going, well, this guy don't know what he's looking for. So Chris was able to help with that. So
yes, exactly. Good. And I've spoken now with, you're actually my third person I've spoken who just got through their CMMC certification. And some others have said that it's just so helpful to have a team. even
Yeah.
if it's a 2-person team in your case, because when your mind is not working at that
Right.
moment, the other person could jump in, and save the
Right.
day.
Yeah, I think it would have been difficult for me to sit there and do that by myself because
Yeah.
it would have, we would have spent a lot more time for me digging to things. And, it's just helpful to have somebody else there because like you said, you're stuck on something else, the question they asked before. And it's like, oh, wait a minute, they asked something else and now I got to find something else. And it made it a lot easier.
Talk to us about how they outlined the assessment throughout the week. Tell us about the scheduling, I would say.
So we did a kickoff meeting, and then and that was like on a Thursday, I think, or something. And then that first week we set up. What we did is we set up a something in our enclave, a SharePoint in our enclave, and then we uploaded all of the documents to that for the assessment. So it's a SharePoint specifically for the assessment team, myself and Chris, as well as the team from CG Silvers. What I did was they could have set up themselves, a SharePoint and stuff, but it allowed us, I said, well, I can set that up for you. So it allowed us to step through not only setting up the SharePoint, which is something that we said we did for our enclave in the SSP, but it allowed us to go through the process of setting up external people to get in and going through the approval process for that, for access control and those type of things and what kind of access they had. So we went through that process, and that, again, there were things within the SSP that says, here's how we do this. And for the CG Silvers, for the assessors, we did that process. And they were like, oh, okay. They said they did it. They did it for us, so we know they did it. So hey, let's check that one off. We got that one real good. So that worked well. We set that up. Then we uploaded all our documentation, and they took a good week to walk through that documentation themselves. And the next week after that, we went through some interviews. We were, again, 2.5 days. We were set up for 3 days. I think it took us 2.5 days to walk through specific requirements and assessment objectives that they needed to see, that they needed, it wasn't just a screenshot. It was, one of the things is your computer has to shut off after 15 minutes, or 30 minutes, whatever you said in that. Well, they want to see that a computer does that. So we had one of our Enclave computers, I showed them through the screen. It's like, here it's on, I just started it up. And we'll set it off to the side. And we went through other assessment objectives. And then it's like, okay, 15 minutes is up. Show us the computer. And so it went to a black screen. So that helped a lot. I mean, that's what we did during the interviews. And then, we shared screens about settings and things like that. And then after that, and we had a meeting every day at the end of the day that said, okay, we finished these requirements. You're still trending toward, getting your certification. And we did that every day. And then at the end of the week, they said, okay, we've covered everything. There's 3 more things that we need some more documentation for. So we went back, we got that documentation, sent them to it. And then the next week was when they came to us and they said, okay, the final thing. And they went through a presentation. And, they said they're recommending certification. So it was really a 3-4 week process for us. So that's how it was laid out.
I think overall, this should be really encouraging, to other small businesses that, hey, this is possible. This is actually achievable. Right now, folks, I want you to comment, in the comments, Eric the Great, congratulations on getting your CMMC level 2 certification. That's amazing. How long did it take and how much money would you say was invested?
So it took about 2 years for us to get ready for it and everything. Now, I say 2 years. Had the law been in effect, we probably could have done it quicker. And there were things that I did in the IT group. We implemented a new ERP system in 2023. So there was a number of months there that I didn't hardly do anything from a CMMC standpoint. So you could probably do it. And I've heard lots of people talk about, it takes about 18 months. And I would agree with that.
Mhm.
I think that's probably, a year to 18 months, depending on how they're working, how long they're working on it and stuff. I mean, I think with some of the documentation from Kieri and stuff like that, it could probably be done in 12 months, but you have to have some of that documentation as well before you get to the assessment. From a cost standpoint, not counting my cost, we spent about, I think it was around 20 grand for documentation, both the policies, procedures, architecture, consulting that went along with that. The licenses and things were, again, relatively small. I think we have a total of 10 licenses.
Mm-hmm.
We have Microsoft GCC High is what we did it in. That was around 10 grand, I believe. And then we have an MFA that's around, I don't know, I think that's less than $500
Mm-hmm.
that is a year. So, you're talking somewhere right around 35, 40 maybe. And again, that doesn't count my time or anything. They're already paying for my time, so they didn't pay anything extra for that. But yeah, 35, 40 grand, I think you can get it done and get certified.
Hey folks, you may not know this, but I'm also leading a CMMC compliance program at a defense contractor. There's a lot involved with CMMC, and I understand how it can feel overwhelming. I was there myself many years ago, but since then, I've created CMMC training focused on defense contractors. The training covers everything from DFAR's contractual clauses to NIST 800-171A, and of course, CMMC. It's received over 100 5-star reviews and is certainly worth checking out. Find it at grcacademy.io. Now back to the episode. Talk to us about lessons learned. What would you say those are?
The key lesson for me is, one, you have to dig into that detail. And again, for me, not being a technical person, that helped me because for me, it's like, okay, if I don't understand it, then I can't explain it to somebody. So I want to understand, what is this doing? What if I'm turning this toggle on within Microsoft 365? What's it doing? And I spent a lot of time trying to understand that. So you have to understand those details, what the requirements are looking for, what those assessment objectives are looking for. I think those are the key things. And I think I went through a lot of iterations from an organization standpoint myself, just to make sure it made sense to me. As I got my CCP and I got my CCA, it's like I made some changes to that, knowing that what an assessor is going to look for. And I set that up so that if you take it to somebody outside of CMMC and you explain to them, it's like, all my stuff is here and I have, 10 different folders. But then this folder has 5 folders under it. And within those 5 folders, there's 12 folders in each one. It's like you're digging for gold in there, some of that. So that organization is key. And then at the end, it's like, once you feel like you've got it, go back through and go through that self-assessment and hit every assessment objective and find it for yourself. Did I meet that or did I not meet that? And I think I appreciate Eric is great thing and stuff. And I am pretty proud of it. The key for those companies out here that might be watching this, it's like, you don't have to have an expert. You don't have to, pay somebody $100,000 to come in and do this. And, you can get this done for a reasonable price. Takes a lot of time. It took us 2 years to get to that point, but you can get this done for a reasonable price. And if if it's something that you can do and kind of break it off and say, this is the part of the business that we're going to get certified in, then it makes it much easier. I think the other thing to do from an assessment standpoint is, one of the things you want to give to those assessors is that map of where all of your stuff is at. Mm-hmm. Because I think that's one thing we did not do. And I think, CG Silvers struggled a little bit with that, because you, as an assessor, an assessment organization, you're trying to understand what this company and how they have everything organized. when I do it again in 3 years,
Mhm.
I will give that assessment organization, here's how I have everything saved. And I have in my maintenance checklist, everything is listed out specifically of, I'm checking for this. Here's how I check for it. Here's where I save the documentation. So I don't have to remember that. It's all on my maintenance checklist. Everything is right in front of me. I can do it, forget about it. I don't have to try to remember it. So 6 months from now, when I'm doing my biannual, it's like, I only did this in July. I don't remember how to do it. Everything's documented right in front of me. I want to be able, if I could get hit by a bus tomorrow, somebody else can come in and say, here's the paperwork, and they can start doing it tomorrow. So, I think that's a key thing. And I think that's what I'd tell people is that, one, you don't have to be an expert at it. Two, if you organize it correctly and you take that to the assessor and say, here's how we have everything organized. Here's where you can find our documentation. Here's where you can find our SSP. Here's where our policies are at. Here's where our procedures are at. And that will help them tremendously and make it easier for you.
This has been great, Eric. Really appreciate your time. Where can people find you and your company?
Oh, our company is Reynolds Construction, and it's reynoldscon.com, REYNOLDSCON.com. And if anybody needs help, be happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on.
All right. Thank you very much, Jacob. I appreciate it.
Hey, folks. Hope you enjoyed that. If you want to see more, be sure to subscribe and then check out this video.